Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are sitting in a quiet, modern kitchen. The morning sun is just beginning to touch the cold tiles on the floor. You hold a ceramic mug in your hands, and the steam rises in soft, white clouds against the window. Take a deep breath and smell that familiar, earthy aroma that wakes up the world every single day. This simple dark liquid is more than just a drink. It is a global traveler with a soul of fire. Have you ever wondered how this small, bitter being conquered every corner of our planet? The story of coffee does not begin in a laboratory or a famous factory. It begins with a moment of pure, accidental discovery in the high, green mountains of Ethiopia. Let's go far back into the mist of time, to a world where the forests were thick and full of secrets. A young goat herder named Kaldi was watching his animals move across the rocky landscape under the hot sun. He noticed something strange that would eventually change the entire course of human history and culture. His goats were usually calm, but today they were dancing and leaping with an energy he had never seen before. They were eating small, bright red berries from a dark green bush with shiny leaves. Kaldi reached out his hand and picked one of the berries, feeling its smooth skin between his fingers. He chewed the fruit, tasting a strange sweetness followed by a deep, unfamiliar bitterness. Within minutes, his heart began to beat faster, and his mind felt as clear as a mountain spring. He did not know it yet, but he had just discovered the spark that would ignite the modern world. He ran to a nearby monastery, carrying the red berries in his pockets to show the monks. He told them about the dancing goats and the incredible feeling of strength in his own body. The head monk looked at the berries with suspicion and threw them into a blazing fire, calling them a temptation. But as the berries burned, a magnificent, rich scent filled the room, stopping every monk in his tracks. They pulled the roasted beans from the glowing coals and crushed them into a bowl of hot water. As they drank the dark liquid, they realized they could stay awake for hours of prayer and deep meditation. The silence of the monastery was broken by the sound of clicking cups and the hum of newfound energy. This was the moment the world woke up, though the rest of the earth was still dreaming. How could a simple mountain berry travel from these lonely heights to every city on the map? In the beginning, coffee was a secret kept by the mountains and the holy men who lived there. The coffee plant grew wild in the shade of tall trees, hidden from the eyes of the great empires. For many years, people did not grind the beans. They mixed the red fruit with animal fat to create energy snacks. Travelers would carry these small balls of coffee and fat across the burning deserts to survive long, difficult journeys. It was a food of survival, a source of resilience for those who walked the path of the unknown. Eventually, the secret crossed the Red Sea and arrived in the bustling ports of Yemen. Here, in the city of Mocha, the bean found its true home and its first great transformation. The people of Yemen began to farm the coffee trees on steep, stone terraces that looked like giant staircases. They guarded the plants with great passion, realizing that they held something more valuable than gold or silk. The air in the port of Mocha smelled of salt water and the roasting of these precious, dark seeds. In the 15th century, the first coffee houses began to appear in the holy cities of the Middle East. These were not like the busy, loud shops we see today in our modern, crowded cities. They were quiet places of deep thought, where men sat on soft carpets and spoke about poetry and stars. The drink was known as the wine of Araby because it sharpened the mind without making the senses dull. You could hear the low murmur of voices and the soft bubbling of water over charcoal fires. Coffee was the engine of conversation, bringing people together to share ideas in a way they never had before. It was a bridge between the physical world of work and the spiritual world of the mind. Children in these regions grew up seeing their fathers gather in the schools of the wise to drink the black broth. The bean was no longer a wild fruit. It was becoming a central part of the human social fabric. It was a quiet revolution, brewing in small clay pots under the desert stars. But this early success came with a heavy price of protection and many strict rules. The leaders of Yemen refused to let a single fertile bean leave their shores, wanting to keep the monopoly forever. They would boil the beans or remove the outer skin before shipping them to ensure nothing could be planted elsewhere. The world wanted the energy of coffee, but the gates to its future were locked tight by the desert kings. How would this prisoner of the sand finally escape to reach the rest of the waiting world? The dream of spreading coffee nearly died many times before it ever reached the shores of Europe or Asia. In the early 1500s, powerful religious leaders in Mecca tried to ban the drink entirely, claiming it was a dangerous drug. They saw how people gathered to talk and think, and they feared the power of a clear and focused mind. They gathered sacks of coffee in the streets and burned them, sending thick clouds of bitter smoke into the sky. For a moment, it seemed like the world's favorite ritual would be erased from history books. The people resisted, hiding their pots and drinking in the shadows of their homes to avoid the watchful eyes of the law. This was the first great test of coffee's resilience, a battle between tradition and a new way of living. Eventually, the ban was lifted because the people's love for the drink was stronger than the fear of the leaders. However, the struggle to grow coffee in new lands was proving to be an even greater and more frustrating obstacle. Many tried to steal the seeds, but the harsh climate and the guarded borders stopped them at every turn. One story tells of a traveler who tried to carry plants across the sea only to watch them wither in the salt air. The delicate trees needed specific rain, specific soil, and the perfect balance of heat and cool mountain mist. Every time a plant died, it felt like a door closing on the future of the global coffee trade. Wealthy merchants in Venice and Istanbul waited for shipments that often arrived late, spoiled, or ruined by the damp holds of wooden ships. The cost was high, and the supply was dangerously low for such a growing demand. In the late 1600s, an Indian pilgrim named Baba Budan decided to take a massive risk that could have cost him his life. He hid 7 fertile coffee beans against his stomach, wrapping them tightly in his clothes as he left the port of Mocha. He slipped past the guards, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird in a small wooden cage. If he were caught, he would be executed as a thief of the state's most precious and protected secret. He stepped onto a ship, carrying the future of an entire industry in his hands. He reached the hills of India and planted the 7 seeds, watching them day and night with anxious eyes. But the weather was unpredictable, and the local pests attacked the young, tender leaves of the strange new plants. He struggled to keep them alive, fighting against the elements and his own growing doubt about the mission. It took years of failure and replanting before a single tree finally stood strong against the Indian wind. The journey of the bean was a journey of constant rejection, yet it refused to vanish. The greatest crisis for coffee came when it finally reached the cold, suspicious streets of Europe. When the first bags arrived in London and Paris, many people looked at the dark, oily liquid with a sense of genuine horror. Doctors claimed that it caused paralysis, and priests called it the bitter invention of Satan because of its dark color. The smell was strange to people who were used to drinking weak ale or tea with their morning meals. It was an alien substance entering a world that was very much afraid of change. In the mid-1600s, the women's petition against coffee was published in London, complaining that the drink made their husbands talk too much. The men were spending all their time in coffee houses, neglecting their work and their families to debate politics. King Charles II of England saw these places as centers of rebellion where people gathered to plot against his crown. He issued a royal proclamation to shut down every coffee house in the country, sending soldiers to nail the doors shut. The smell of roasted beans was replaced by the smell of fear and heavy iron locks. While the politicians fought in the cities, a different kind of crisis was happening in the fields of the New World. Europeans had taken coffee plants to their colonies in the Caribbean and South America, but the labor was brutal. The history of coffee is stained with the dark truth of slavery and the suffering of thousands of people in the sun. Men and women worked until their hands bled, picking berries under the threat of the whip to satisfy a distant market. The drink that brought clarity to the mind was being built on a foundation of human pain and deep injustice. Diseases also began to sweep through the plantations, threatening to wipe out entire varieties of the coffee plant. Coffee rust. A bright orange fungus began to eat the leaves of the trees, turning lush green forests into skeletal remains. In places like Sri Lanka, the entire coffee industry collapsed in just a few short years, leaving families with nothing. Farmers stood in their fields, looking at the dying trees and wondering if they had lost everything to a ghost they could not see. The global supply of coffee was hanging by a very thin and fragile thread. Even in the homes of the poor, coffee was often too expensive to buy, so people created desperate and strange imitations. They roasted chicory roots, acorns, or even burnt bread to try and recreate that dark, comforting flavor they craved. The world was hungry for the bean, but nature, politics, and human greed were all working together to destroy it. It was the lowest point in the story, a time of shadows where the fire of the discovery seemed ready to go out forever. The turning point did not come from a king's decree, but from the simple, stubborn will of the common people. In London, the ban on coffee houses lasted only 11 days because the public outcry was so loud and so immediate. The king realized he could not stop the flow of ideas any more than he could stop the tide of the ocean. Coffee houses reopened, and they became the birthplaces of modern businesses like Lloyd's of London and the Great Stock Exchange. The bitter invention was becoming the very fuel of the new, fast-moving capitalist world. In the Americas, a single man and a single plant changed the destiny of the entire Western Hemisphere. A French naval officer named Gabriel Declus spent years trying to get a coffee seedling from the royal gardens in Paris. He finally succeeded and boarded a ship for the long, dangerous journey to the island of Martinique in the Caribbean. The voyage was a nightmare of storms, pirate attacks, and a terrifying shortage of fresh drinking water on the open sea. Declus had to make a choice that few men would have the courage to make. As the water barrels ran dry, he shared his own small ration of water with the struggling plant to keep it from dying. He sat on the deck, parched and weak, watching the green leaves soak up the moisture he desperately needed for himself. He saw the plant as a symbol of hope, a bridge to a new life for the people of the islands. When he finally arrived, he planted the survivor in his garden and built a wall of thorns around it for protection. That one tiny plant eventually became the parent of millions of trees across the Americas. This act of sacrifice broke the monopoly of the East and allowed coffee to flourish in the rich, volcanic soil of the West. Brazil, with its vast landscapes and perfect climate, soon became the new heart of the coffee world. The price began to drop, making the drink accessible, not just to the rich, but to the workers in the factories. The turning point was the moment coffee stopped being a luxury and started being a necessity for the modern worker. It moved from the palace to the porch and from the monastery to the kitchen table. Society began to shift its rhythm from the slow pace of alcohol to the sharp, focused pace of caffeine. The Enlightenment, a time of great scientific and philosophical growth, happened in the presence of the coffee pot. Instead of being dull and tired, the great thinkers of the age were alert and ready to challenge the old ways of the world. The bean had survived the fire, the theft, and the bans to become the silent partner of human progress. The dark clouds of the crisis were finally starting to lift, revealing a world that was ready to work. The transition from a rare luxury to a global commodity was a long struggle that required decades of discipline and hard labor. In the mountains of Brazil and Colombia, generations of families dedicated their lives to the rhythm of the harvest. They learned to read the clouds and the soil, knowing exactly when the berries were at their peak of sweetness. It was not an easy life. It was a life of early mornings, heavy sacks, and the constant fear of a sudden frost. The progress of the coffee industry was measured in inches, not miles, as new roads were cut through the jungle. In the cities, inventors struggled for years to find a way to make the perfect cup of coffee at home. Early machines were dangerous, heavy, and often exploded under the pressure of the steam they tried to control. You could hear the hiss of failing valves and the clatter of metal in small workshops across Europe and America. Engineers worked late into the night, fueled by the very drink they were trying to perfect for the masses. They wanted to capture the essence of the bean without the bitterness of the old boiling methods. The struggle for quality was also a battle against the instant revolution that threatened to ruin the reputation of the bean. During the Great Wars, soldiers needed energy, so scientists developed powders that could dissolve in hot water in the middle of a muddy trench. While this helped the soldiers survive, it took away the soul and the ritual of the coffee experience. After the wars, the world was filled with cheap, tasteless coffee that sat in cans on supermarket shelves for months. The art of the craft was being lost to the speed of the modern industrial machine. True coffee lovers refused to let the tradition die, continuing to roast small batches in their own kitchens and shops. They practiced the art of the cupping ceremony, tasting hundreds of varieties to find the subtle notes of chocolate, fruit, and spice. This was a slow process of education, teaching the public that coffee was as complex and varied as the finest wines. It took years of patient work to convince people to pay more for a bean that was grown with care and respect. The struggle was against the clock and against the desire for everything to be fast and cheap. On the farms, the struggle for fairness began to take root as workers demanded better conditions and better pay. The fair trade movement was born from the realization that the people who grew the coffee were often the ones who suffered the most. It was a long, slow climb toward justice, requiring the cooperation of buyers and sellers across thousands of miles. The history of the bean was moving from a story of exploitation to a story of partnership and global responsibility. This discipline of care was the only way to ensure the future of the drink for the next generation. The great breakthrough came in the late 20th century with what many call the third wave of coffee culture. Suddenly, the world stopped looking at coffee as a simple caffeine delivery system and started seeing it as an art form. Small coffee shops began to pop up in neighborhoods, featuring baristas who treated every cup like a masterpiece. You could hear the rhythmic sound of the grinder and the smooth swirl of milk being steamed into a silky foam. The public attention shifted back to the origin of the bean, the height of the mountain, and the name of the farmer. In the 1970s and 80s, brands like Starbucks took the Italian coffee house experience and brought it to the global stage. It was a breakthrough of atmosphere, creating a third place between work and home where people could gather and belong. The green mermaid logo became a symbol of a new kind of social status and a new way of interacting with our daily routines. People were no longer just drinking coffee. They were participating in a global community of flavor and style. The bean had finally achieved total victory, becoming the most traded commodity in the world after oil. Technology also saw a massive leap forward with the invention of precision brewing tools and high-end espresso machines. Scientists mapped the genome of the coffee plant, allowing farmers to grow trees that were more resilient to climate change and disease. We found ways to process the beans that brought out flavors that Kaldi, the goat herder, could never have imagined. The breakthrough was the realization that the potential of the small red berry was almost limitless if treated with enough scientific curiosity. Public attention turned toward the environmental impact of coffee, leading to the creation of bird-friendly and shade-grown certifications. We realized that to save the coffee, we had to save the forests and the ecosystems where it lived. This was a breakthrough in human thinking, the understanding that our morning cup was connected to the health of the entire planet. The stories of the farmers were told on the backs of the bags, making the connection between the consumer and the producer real and visible. The world was finally looking the coffee grower in the eye. Today, coffee is a multi-billion-dollar industry that supports the livelihoods of over 100 million people worldwide. From the high-tech labs of Tokyo to the small kiosks in Nairobi, the dark liquid is a universal language of hospitality. It has traveled from the fires of an Ethiopian monastery to the space station orbiting our blue Earth. The breakthrough was not just in the taste, but in the way the bean became a symbol of human connection across every border. We'd taken a wild mountain berry and turned it into the heartbeat of global civilization. As we sit by the fire today and look back at this long journey, what is the true meaning of the history of coffee? It is a story of resilience, showing us that even the smallest and most bitter beginnings can lead to a world-changing end. The coffee bean reminds us that growth often requires the heat of the fire and the pressure of the grind. We are like those beans. Our struggles and our challenges are what bring out our true strength and our most beautiful flavors. Are you willing to face the fire to find out who you truly are? Coffee is a testament to the power of human curiosity and our endless desire to connect with one another. Every cup we drink is a silent conversation with a farmer thousands of miles away whose name we will never know. It teaches us that we are all part of a vast, invisible web of work, tradition, and shared experience. When you take a sip of your coffee tomorrow, remember the dancing goats, the brave officer on the ship, and the millions of hands that picked the fruit. You are drinking a piece of history, a liquid memory of human courage and survival. The bean also carries a philosophical lesson about the importance of waking up, not just physically but mentally and spiritually. Coffee was the drink of the Enlightenment because it encouraged people to think for themselves and to question the world around them. It is a symbol of the alert mind, the focused heart, and the restless spirit that always seeks to improve. In a world that can often feel dark and confusing, the ritual of the coffee cup offers a moment of clarity and a small spark of light. It is a daily reminder that we have the power to change our perspective and start again. As the steam fades and the fire burns low, let us appreciate the quiet strength of this ordinary thing. We often overlook the epic sagas that hide in our cupboards and on our kitchen counters. But when we stop to listen, even a simple coffee bean has a voice that speaks of empires, revolutions, and the unbreakable human spirit. It is a bridge across time, connecting us to the ancient mountains and the future dreams of a better, more connected world. The night is quiet now, but the spirit of the bean remains awake and ready for the dawn. Thank you for sitting with me by the fire today and listening to the story of the black gold that changed the world. I hope you feel a little more connected to the world around you and the history that lives in your hands. There's magic in the mundane if you only take the time to look for it. Until next time, my friends.